Hello and welcome to Katrina's Creations. Today we are going to be talking about colorwork knitting. It's also known as stranded knitting, a little bit of the history, the different types of it, and a demonstration of how to do it. So let's get started. Stranded knitting and colored knitting the words are interchangeable. Stranded just refers to the strands of yarn that you are carrying on the wrong side or the back side of your work as you work with two colors or more. That's what color work is. And when you're carrying these across, in order to be considered true color work, it has to extend the full width of the work you're working on, or if you're working in the round, it has to extend all the way around. That's why intarsia is not technically considered color work, because you're only working with one color at a time, and you do that and then you attach on almost like a mitered square blanket where you're attaching another color. It's multicolored, but you're only working with one color at a time, where color work you are working with two or more. Now there are different types of color work, and I'm going to show you some pictures of different types of the color work that are out there. The first is called Bohus, and it comes from Sweden. It is a Swedish style. I don't have a demonstration to show you of what it looks like, but it can include up to 5 different colors. They tend to mix merino and angora, so it has a halo to it, so it has a fuzzy texture, and it's done with very thin weight yarns, like your lace or fingering weight. It's done very finely knitted. So that's called Bohus. The next two are both Norwegian styles. It is called, and I'm probably going to totally butcher this, but Setestal or Salbu. Now Salbu I had heard of before, because if you remember, there's a lot of mittens. They're called Salbu mittens. They are Norwegian. They tend to have a point here where your middle finger would come up, and they have a lot of color work on the outside part of your hands. So that comes from Norway. They tend to be just 2 colors. One of those colors is usually white. They first appeared, this type of style of knitting, back in the 1600s, and I'm going to show you some pictures of it. This book that I'm showing it to you from is called Knitting Workshop by Elizabeth Zimmerman. And here you can see some pictures of Norwegian knitting. It's, like I said, mainly 2 colors. Here's some other ones here. These are sweaters. And here are some hats that are in that style. The next type is called a Lopa Paisa, and that is an Icelandic sweater. It's an Icelandic, predominantly sweaters. They are known for the yoked sweaters that are made out of Lopi wool or Icelandic wool. Now I do have one that I have made. I did not use Icelandic wool with it. I actually used some other, it is wool, but it's not Icelandic. They tend to have like a snowflake type of motif. And the sleeves, actually you do the entire yoke, and then the sleeves come off of the yoke from here. And the yoke is made by increases all the way around, so that the pattern stays the same all the way around. You can see right here was where this is in the back, where I would move to the next row. So anyway, this one actually is sadly going to get ripped apart and remade again, because it's way too big for me. I made it, I wore it, I lost weight, and now I can't wear it anymore. And this is one I cannot just take in, because it is knit completely in the round and there are no seams whatsoever in the yoke. To try to make it smaller, it would mess up the pattern. So this one has to be ripped apart to be redone in order to make it work. But this is an example of what one looks like. And then I also have a picture on the back of the book here there is another one. And then the last type is probably the most well-known type of color work, and that is called Fair Isle color work. Now, Fair Isle knitwear or Fair Isle color work comes from the Fair Isle, which is one of the islands of the Shetlands. The Shetlands are an arpeggio of islands in off the tip of North Scotland. So they are known for their weight, their heaviness, because any of these colorwork sweaters, I'm going to hold this one up to demonstrate, they're not just one thickness of yarn. Because the inside is where you are carrying the other yarn through, this is where the name stranding comes from, because you can see here's the strands where I was carrying the white yarn in between the black. But as a result, it creates 2 layers. So these are very, very warm sweaters, especially at the portion where the yoke is. By the time you get down to the body, it's just, of course, a single layer, unless it is done Fair Isle all the way down. So Fair Isle sweaters have been made for hundreds of years, but they became very popular and well known in 1921 because the Prince of Wales at that time, who was, he later became King Edward, I believe, and then he abdicated from the throne. Okay, he was seen wearing a Fair Isle sweater in 1921, and it prompted everybody to start a fashion trend. So here are some up-close pictures of Fair Isle knitting. They tend to be geometric or nature-inspired. They tend to go in bands, as you can see, like different bands of color. This one has more than 2 colors in it, but there's always only 2 colors worked together at a time. And this pattern, the X and O, are very, very popular in that style. So I'm going to turn the camera around and I'm going to show you, well, let me show you first the one I am working on, which falls into none of the categories at this point because it is not a yoked sweater. This has a raglan sleeve, but I am doing color work on it. So this is what it looks like so far. It's in a pink and a cranberry. And you can see the stranding on the back right here. And now I'm going to turn the camera around and I'm going to show you how to knit this. And yeah, just a technique that it isn't necessarily the only technique for doing it. It's the technique that I use. So let me get that set up and we'll get started. All right, now you are working with 2 colors at one time. So the way I do it, here are my 2 colors here in the back with your right side facing you. And here's my 2 colors. I tend to put I tend to hold in my right hand the dominant color, which in this case is the pink, and I hold the non-dominant color, which is in this case is the cranberry, in my left hand. If you are a continental knitter, you will have no problem whatsoever with this technique. So we're going to be starting, because this is going to be a cranberry color. You're doing just the general knit stitch, but I'm going to do this as if I was knitting continental. So I'm going to pull it through these 2 stitches. And now I'm ready to go to the pink yarn, and here's where I try to keep my strands from being very long, because if you have too long a strands running through here, you can tend to get this so that it puckers if you pull it too tight. You can also, when you're trying to put it on, get it caught with your fingers and things. So I try to keep my strands right in here. You can see that that's about as wide as they go. I try to keep them fairly tight. I try to keep them fairly close so that I don't have my strands running over 4 and 5 stitches. They only go over 2, and sometimes not even then. So we are ready for the pink now. So I'm going to move this up close so you can see what I'm doing. This is a regular knit stitch, but I'm going to bring this pink in front of the cranberry, the first stitch. Now I'm getting ready for the second stitch, and this time I'm bringing it around the back. That kind of captures this strand, and then I pull it. And that way you can see right here that I have captured that strand within the pink yarn. And that just keeps it from being very long, and it keeps it from puckering as well. So let's do the next two, which are going to be the cranberry again. So we're doing 2 stitches here. And now I'm going for the pink stitch, and I'm going to bring it through the front. As you can see, here it is. There's my red yarn in the back, and I brought it in the front. The next stitch, I'm bringing it around the back of the red yarn so that it captures it. You can see it right there. And now we're going to go back to the red again. Like I said, the knitting where I'm holding this on my left hand side is continental stitch or continental knitting. Yes, when I'm holding the yarn in my left hand like this is if you were knitting continental, which is actually the most efficient way to do it because you're not having to flick your finger. I tend to be a flicker, which means I move my finger back and forth like this. You don't do that with the continental method of knitting. You are just going in, grabbing it, and pulling it through. It's just a lot more efficient. And then I'm going to do 2 red. This is where my increase is, but this is not an increase row. So I'm just going to slip my marker, do another of the red. And again, I'm going to go front and then through the back so that it locks that stitch in place. So you can see where I have done the increase here. This is along my arm section. So that is how I do color work. I just find that it doesn't pucker as much. You know, it lays nice and flat, because if you get your strands too drawn out and you pull them too tight, it can kind of make your work kind of do this a little bit. My black and white sweater, some of that has done that in a few places. But so far so good with this one. But this is how I do it. It works for me. There's other techniques, but this is just what I find is helpful. This section here that I did, it's every other stitch all the way across one row, and then the opposite across here. So this one I did not worry about going over the back or the front of the stitch, you know, to lock the strand in place or anything, because it was just covering over one stitch, so it wasn't as much. But when you're going over stitches where you're skipping over 2 or more, I use this technique because I just find it keeps it, like I said, from puckering. So I hope you have found this helpful. If you have, please give me a thumbs up, and thanks again for watching.